Done.
Hello and welcome to this Ranger4 webcast. Today's webcast will look at making DevOps happen using the Ranger4 DevOps transformation framework. The webcast will be brought to you by Helen Beale, Head of DevOps at Ranger4. If you have any questions, please enter them in the questions feature and we'll answer them at the end. For now, I'll pass you over to Helen.
Thanks, Tej, and hello, everybody, and thanks for coming along today. As billed, this is the Making DevOps Happen webcast, and we're going to be talking about the Ranger4 DevOps transformation framework today. So first of all, let's set the scene a little bit by talking about why we have DevOps in the first place. So we have a situation in the market where IT has become more critically strategic than ever before for the enterprises and organisations that we work with, which is a very exciting time for us that work in technology. However, what happens then is the business puts a lot of pressure on the IT development teams to innovate lots of new and funky things and get them out to the end users so that they can experience all these great applications that do all sorts of amazing things for them. So they're trying to innovate all the time, and that means they're trying to push lots of change through the systems. Then we've got the IT operations people who are very busy trying to keep these systems and infrastructures that have developed and evolved over sort of decades, maybe 20, 30 years, to become very sophisticated and actually quite fragile. So the ops people are trying to keep these systems up. They're often actually rewarded and may have bonus schemes around uptime. So they're not so keen on the change that's being pushed through development. They'd kind of like everything to be quite stable. They're also often very, very busy with trying to cope with what technical debt causes. So lots of system failures and system problems and management and maintenance and housekeeping assistance. They get a lot of unplanned work, which keeps the ops teams enormously busy. So on the ground, the kind of thing that we actually see is we hear complaints about development saying that it's taking too long for environments and machines and virtual machines to be made available for them for the new development platforms and testing platforms that they're trying to work with. We hear ops people actually complaining that dev people are asking for access to production systems that they feel that they shouldn't have access to. But I guess the reason that the dev people are asking for that access is because they're not getting what they think they need or want as quickly as they hope for. The other thing that we see is war rooms, and we physically see permanent war rooms in some of our customer sites that are rooms in the IT department that are labelled as such, which is where everyone gathers when there's an outage. And that can be very painful and stressful for everyone involved, and perhaps not everyone always goes in with maybe the right attitude, so there can be a lot of blame and fault laying at people's doors rather than everyone trying to focus in on what's causing the issue and how to resolve it and get back on track and how to avoid it happening again. Another very common conflict that we see, particularly around release management, actually, where people tend to write a lot of scripts, and one person normally does that. So they'll sort of be doing a manual deployment and it'd be quite boring. They'll think, I could speed that bit up by writing a script. And then they'll think, another day I'll write another script and another script until they have this whole bunch of scripts that they're the only person in the organisation understands. So when a deployment happens and fails, they're the only person that can fix it. So they're the person that gets called at 3 a.m. and they come in and they fix it all and it's all wonderful and they're a hero. But the reality is that they're actually rather a bottleneck. Another thing that we often see is when an outage occurs, like how do you find out about that? And unfortunately, some organisations, the first time they know about it is when they're told by one of their users or one of the customers, which is not, I'm sure we all can agree, an ideal situation to be in. And finally, and I think this is common across the whole IT industry, people are just incredibly busy trying to get through all of the work that's on their plate. They're working much longer than the hours that they've been contracted in an attempt to get through all the workload that they have been given. So there've been a couple of articles recently in the market which I think have been quite timely, actually, saying that we're all a bit bored of defining DevOps, and we do things like our DevOps Liftoff workshop, which is the first task in it is to define what DevOps is and what it means to that organisation, which I think is an important thing to do. But I think most of us really understand what DevOps is all about and what it's here to solve now. So we're not going to dwell on this too much today, and just say that when we talk about DevOps, we're talking about using methodologies and automation to be able to ship code faster and better code, higher quality code faster. And the way that we do that is by collaborating more effectively between IT and the business, and also within IT, and not just development operations. Everyone has a say or a do in how that software is getting to market. So why now? And this isn't a why now for DevOps. This is a why now for the DevOps transformation framework in particular that we've developed here. So What we've done is for quite a while we've been engaging with organisations to get them started with DevOps. So I mentioned the DevOps Liftoff workshop a moment ago. We also have a DevOps maturity assessment that we use, which is like a 10-day piece of consulting where we come in and do some interviews and build a roadmap and fit and prioritise various tasks to get you to a visualised end state. What we've tended to do after that, though, has been very, very custom oriented to each particular customer. And we have seen that there are a lot of patterns in what we're doing. So what we decided it would be useful to do is document all of that so that organisations can either follow our framework themselves to help them do DevOps and report on when DevOps is done and keep on measuring it. Or they can ask us to come in and provide them with a lead transformation consultant to help them run that transformation program. Now, what's quite interesting about trying to do this is DevOps itself is generally recognised to be around 5 years old in the marketplace. It started as effectively a Twitter hashtag for DevOps Days by Patrick Dubois. So it's very much a grassroots movement. We do see lots of customers still treating it that way. There are some people, and they tend to be people from what we call the unicorns in the market. So the startups who have been able to do DevOps from day one. They haven't really had any of the enterprise challenges of legacy systems, of legacy organisational structures where perhaps the development and operations teams are quite siloed. And these people that are very into the grassroots and the freedom of the movement are quite resistant to any formalisation of the structure. However, the conversations I'm having with my customers and my prospects is this is exactly what they need, is a framework to help them understand which steps they need to complete in what order, some templates to help them do things like set goals and write business cases, and a way in which they can formalise the reporting and measurement of their DevOps projects. So we feel the time is right. So we have developed our DevOps transformation framework. So we do believe absolutely there is a need to define the process. We believe that needs to be in a quantifiable and measurable way. And any of you on the call that have some familiarity with DevOps have probably heard the acronym from John Willis, CAMS. Some people sometimes change to CALMS, in which the M stands for metrics. And metrics are a really core part of everything we try and do in DevOps. And that's really emphasised in the DTF, the DevOps Transformation Framework. And hopefully you'll see in a moment how we do that in the different areas. And again, as I said earlier, I think it's really important that we have this structured and defined approach, saying, right, these are the activities that we need to undertake. These are the things that we measure against. This is what a maturity scale looks like. This is how we're going to define success. And this is how we're going to continually report on success and keep the project moving forward. The DTF is designed to be very comprehensive. We'll look at some of the things in a minute, like some of the maturity scales and things that we'll use. And you'll probably be thinking, well, I'm a bit of that, but I'm not so much that. And I really need that, but I've done that already. So it needs to be comprehensive, but it also needs to be very flexible and customizable so that we can effectively just take the bits out that you don't need. So there's a number of checklists, for example, and you can just cross lines out if you think that's not relevant to us. We don't want to do that. There's things that we need to do around when we look at the metrics in a minute. You'll see the metrics are all quite DevOps, technical, process oriented, but actually we need to pull out business metrics as well. But obviously they're going to be very unique to every organisation that uses the DTF. So we've kind of covered this already. There's lots of reasons to do DevOps, and really in the DTF, what we're trying to do is looking at these reasons in a bit more detail. And as I said earlier, getting these metrics around them, so really understanding how many releases you're doing at the moment and the frequency of them, what it would mean to do more or even be doing them on demand. How do we measure the quality of your software right now? How do we say there's so many defects in a certain time period where you might have multiple applications, and you'll almost certainly have differing development cycles that will increase and decrease the number of defects that are coming through at different times? How do we look at outages? How do we look at how long it's taking you to recover from an outage and what that cost to the business is? Is there a way that we can measurably say when that application is down, you are not transacting your credit card applications or your mortgage applications or your payments to Swift or whatever it might be? So the DTF is very much looking at all of these reasons that you can see in front of you, and I appreciate that's quite a long list, but really trying to get you to be a thriving business. So we know that IT is going to be essential to survive, but we'd like to take you to a higher level than that, where you're actually thriving rather than just surviving. So we've broken the DTF down into 3 core parts. So there are 3 core sections that you work through. So for many years when we've been working with customers talking about the SDLC and ALM, Application Lifecycle Management, overall, we've always talked about people, process and tools, and the fact that you need to get the people right first. So you need to get the right people in your organisation in the right roles and the right organisational structure. Once you've got that right, you can start looking at the processes and start streamlining the processes and the handoffs between those various people. And finally, when you're sure that you've got your processes optimized and well documented and defined, we can finally look at automation and perhaps putting some tools in to further streamline those processes and optimize the speed at which you can do things. We kind of stepped up people, process, tools a little bit for the DevOps environment. So when we talk about people, we're now talking about culture, and it is a bit of a wider discussion because we're also talking about cultural attributes, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail as well, and what a DevOps culture looks like. And with interactions, we're not just talking about processes, we are talking about handoffs, and it's a bit more extended into the business than we've traditionally talked about now that we're getting more involved with DevOps. And finally, automation and tools are probably pretty much interchangeable. So before you even start, the first step that we need you to do, and some of you on the call, again, may have seen an initiative that we run called #DevOps Friday 5. It's a weekly blog, so we ask people that we know as gurus or thought leaders for DevOps in the industry to complete 5 standard questions every week. One of them is, what's the biggest mistake or most common mistake that you see when people are trying to do DevOps? Another one, for example, is, where do you think DevOps will be in 2020? But the first example question that I gave you about the most common problem is a very frequent answer that we get from our experts is that people don't get their project mandated at the very start. And we have seen this happen in organisations where IT have tried to create kind of a grassroots movement. They may have created some kind of DevOps days, events internally, but they've really struggled to get off the ground because they haven't had that executive level sponsorship that's needed to understand and support the investment that would be needed to really change things. So that's step 1 before we even get into the cultural part of the DTF. So step 2, very much linked to that, is then establish who your project stakeholders are. So ideally, some people from the business and some people from each core component of IT, and these are going to be the people that, with the exec sponsorship, are going to push the project forward. So once you've done those 2 couple of things, you're ready to gather everyone in a room and start on the DTF and start with the first few exercises and activities. And we really start with thinking about the culture. As I said, this is where we really need to begin. It's at the cultural level. So this is our view on what a DevOps culture looks like. Everyone knows that they're on the same team. Work is a fairly non-stressful experience. Everyone knows what they've got to do, and we're getting that work through and that innovation through to the end user with hopefully not too many hiccups and not too many errors. And if there is any kind of problem, we've done some kind of smart failure work, so you can preempt that failure, or you can fix anything that's failed very quickly. DevOps organizations must focus on the end user experience. So they must not be inward looking. They must understand that everything that they're doing is about their customer, whether that is an internal customer or an external customer. And shared goals. So this comes up over and over again when we do breakfast briefing panels, is that people need to know what the goals are, and everyone has to have the same goal, and everyone has to be every day aware of that, what that goal is, and be able to see it very clearly. So that's what we're aiming for. So the first part of the DTF, and this is a very high level presentation version of the DTF. The DTF is a PDF document with a number of parts to it and lots of checklists and lots of activity descriptions. But effectively, this is what we're trying to do in part 1. So the first thing is identify and document the high-level business goals that the organisation has. So where is the business going? Are they internationally expanding? Are they trying to cope with mergers or acquisitions? Are they trying to introduce new product lines? There's all sorts of different things that could be happening there. Once the whole team has agreed what those are, then we baseline the first set of metrics. The first set of metrics we're looking at are the cultural metrics, and we have a pre-built cultural survey for your staff to complete, and we can either do that in a kind of traditional method of paper or email, or we can use a more sophisticated survey platform like SurveyMonkey, or show you how to do it if you want to run it yourselves, and get that initial view of what sort of state your current culture is in and how DevOpsy it looks like. So we'll talk about things like how blame is viewed, how failure is viewed, how people think their ideas are received and acted upon, and all sorts of different things like that. Totally customizable, but there's a basic survey template there for you to use as you like. Once you've got those metrics, and these metrics are a bit different from any of the other metrics we'll collect through the DTF, because it's very difficult with culture to actually put a quantifiable number on it. So we know, and there's many reports, and the Puppet State of DevOps report last year in 2014 showed this. We know that happier people are more productive people. We know that's a fact, but I don't think any of us can take a case to a CFO or a financial director that says, we've made our people 10% more happy and therefore the business is going to be 5% more profitable. It's just not possible to write a business case like that. That said, the culture is the cornerstone of everything we're trying to do here, and we can measure it. We just can't really write a very clear business case around it. So we gather these metrics, and once we've got those metrics, we can start. And you could theoretically, I mean, actually, we do this quite often in the DevOps Liftoff workshop. We start identifying desired future state. But if you've baselined the metrics already, hopefully you'll have maybe surveyed 40, 100 people, and you'll start to see patterns. And you'll think, actually, we do have a bit of culture of blame, or maybe we need to look at the way that we treat our hierarchies and our job titles a bit better. And hopefully you'll see some specific things from the survey that you can use to help identify and document your desired future state for your culture. The next thing is to, once we've understood that, hopefully that will give us some intelligence around the team setup and the organisational setup as well. And we're going to go, I've got quite a few slides actually on the anti-patterns and patterns for teams in a moment, so we'll go through them. They're, again, part of the kind of tool set that we provide as a DTF for all these teams patterns for you to walk through yourselves and kind of decide where you are now, where you'd like to be, whether there is a medium ground or a journey you need to go along to get there. Once you've done that, you can plan and execute your organisational change then. So it might mean moving people around in buildings or in teams or on floors. We go to lots of customer sites. I've seen dev on one side of the corridor on the ground floor and ops on the other side. I've seen dev on one floor, ops on another floor. We talk to lots of larger global enterprises who have even more complicated environments, and we'll see my attempt at a pattern for that in a moment. But what to do when you've got multiple applications or product lines and you therefore have got multiple development teams and operations teams, and some of the things we talk about in terms of how to address what we call shifting left. So we use it a lot in testing, but just generally involving people in the process earlier. So, for example, that complaint we hear about, operations haven't got me an environment quick enough. Quite often operations haven't heard about that requirement until 5 minutes before, and they are very busy with everything else they've got to do. So if we can involve operations earlier in understanding what's coming down the pipe, they will be better placed to react when we're asked to. So one of the things we often suggest is that people think about involving their operations staff in the weekly stand-ups that development often have if they're doing things like Agile and Scrum, which is quite a practical piece of advice, apart from when global enterprises have, for example, a development team in Sri Lanka and an operations team in London. So there's lots of discussion to have there. Once we kind of thought about the organisational change, we've documented what we're planning to do there, and we can document how, who's going to do what and what that activity looks like, and then set some review dates around that. We can also start looking at shared goals and define those very clearly, and again, publish them through the team. So in the same way that we're going to publish the high-level business goals, we're then going to publish some high-level DevOps goals. And this won't be the only set of goals that we do, because when we get into looking at interactions and we get into automation, there will be other sets of goals that we need to set there, as in the same way there'll be more metrics that will need to be collected. Coming towards the end of the cultural section, we need to review the reward system that an organisation currently has. Now, we speak to people a lot about rewards. It's very closely linked to goals. So it's all very well setting a goal, but it helps people modify their behaviour if they're going to be rewarded in some way at the end of it. And this is a whole other sort of hour-long presentation that I can do on like how to motivate people and the way that intrinsic and extrinsic rewards differ in different types of environments and different workloads. So we're not going to dwell on that too much today. But another key point I think to make about the reward system, and again we hear this a lot from traditional enterprises, is there might be a reward system at a team level, but there might also be a corporate bonus scheme, and there might be different teams being rewarded in different ways, and quite often those reward structures may be in conflict. So we need to have a close look at that, make sure everything is lined up across the enterprise, and make sure everything is in line with what we're trying to do in terms of DevOps. And finally, on the cultural section, I haven't put this in the slide. It's very much part of the DTF itself. But when we talk about rewards and extrinsic rewards and intrinsic rewards, where we often end up is that the three main elements of a DevOps culture is where people feel that they have autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And those three things enable us to feel intrinsic rewards when we achieve the goals that we have at work. So mastery, as I say, very important. And there's ways to reward mastery or acknowledge mastery, and certification is a big one of them. Now, in the same way that some people in the DevOps market resist the formalization of DevOps in the way that a framework or a cookbook or a manifesto, and we're not particularly keen on manifestos, actually. I think I said earlier we find them a bit vague, but certainly a defined way of people monitoring their progress and having some specific activities to undertake, report on. Some people in the industry are a little bit resistant on the concept of certifying people in DevOps. So we're very supportive of it. In fact, we're on the board of regents for the very recently announced DevOps Institute, which will be offering global certifications, and Ranger4 will be a regional education provider for the DevOps Institute. And again, we haven't made this decision on our own. We've made this decision based on the conversations we're having with customers and our customers' and partners' reaction to getting a formalised certification that shows that they have an understanding of DevOps and how all the pieces fit together and what it means is very important to them. So another step in the cultural plan is to look at your education plan for all of your employees. Are your employees feeling that they have mastery in their subject? Is there further education and training that we can give them? And what can we do in terms of certification? And not just DevOps certification. It might be Linux or WebSphere or Tomcat or all sorts of different certifications that might be needed. But it's a good time to review it when we're looking at this DevOps cultural piece. So I mentioned these teams, patterns and anti-patterns that we have. So this is the classic anti-pattern for DevOps. So I described this earlier, having Dev on one side of a corridor or one floor and Ops on another. This is what we're really trying to get away from. We're trying to bring these two together. This one is an interesting, debatable one. A lot of people are resistant to the idea of creating a DevOps team because you're creating another DevOps silo. What we're really trying to do is get, and we'll come to the patterns in a minute, but I'll just kind of justify this slide as a pattern for a moment in a couple of instances. The first instances, we have seen it work, and if any of you have been to our breakfast briefings in Cambridge, you'll have heard Johnny Waldridge, who used to be at M&S, talk, who's now at the Cambridge Satchel Company, and he talks about how he did DevOps at M&S, and it was very much this kind of structure actually, but that DevOps team in the middle was very much a DevOps tiger team. So I should probably do another slide one day that shows little grey dots popping out and moving around in the green and the red dots at some point. So that can work. Can also work when we're trying to get to the next step. So sorry, I've skipped forward a slide. I'm not quite ready. I'm just going to skip back. When we're trying to get to the next step, so that might be a transitional pattern for somebody. So not the ultimate goal, but where they're going next. This pattern we don't agree with at all. Ops will always have a place in every environment, or there's always going to be a need for those kind of tasks. So we don't think that's a very good plan. This is kind of the first level. So you've got some nice smooth collaboration between Dev and Ops going on. You've got some shared skills between them, and I think when we're having discussions with customers about what these patterns look like and how you're going to move towards them, we have to discuss skill sets and the fact that you can't be jack of all trades and master of none. So you can't have everyone being able to do everything. It's about understanding what you've got and what you're trying to achieve and where those crossovers are. This is the fully embedded DevOps utopic pattern. Takes a while to get there. So we'll have more discussions as we go through about how to create that pattern. Some people go for this one. So having DevOps effectively delivering infrastructure to development via Ops, so doing an IaaS job. And then we have DevOps again being a team straddling against two. And again, I kind of think, this is kind of the tiger team pattern again. It's also about, I think, kind of a transitional model for me. I think this is again, recognizing that it takes a while to understand those skill sets and where everyone sits. And here's a temporary DevOps pattern. So you have the Ops and Dev talking to DevOps in the middle. So as I say, transitionary patterns. This is my attempt at an enterprise DevOps pattern. So it's kind of recognizing that a lot of organisations aren't as simple as just one dev team and one ops team and creating DevOps between them. Actually, there's multiple teams spread globally, and that creates a much more complex but not impossible picture. So I touched on this earlier, so I won't go on too much about it again, but DevOps Institute, DevOps certifications, we think that's an important part of recognising mastery in this particular area. So the second part of the DTF is all about interactions, as I said earlier, and we're really drilling down into kind of 4 main management areas and then an overall assessment of how those pieces fit together. So we're looking at requirements management and then at build and configuration, then at release and deployment, and then application performance management. So some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, she's forgotten about architecture and design, and what about our development platforms, and what about our other kind of monitoring platforms and things. So as I said earlier, it's designed to be quite comprehensive and customizable, but we kind of also have to keep it focused in some respects. And this is a discussion you can have internally when you look at the framework, or with us about which, if there's any other pieces you'd like to deliver there. But we see these as the core component pieces of an overall DevOps project. So again, back to the metrics. The first thing we need to do is measure the current maturity across those management areas. So we've got our overall maturity scale. We use this a lot in front of customers. It's a great way of driving discussion. It is quite high level though. We have really distilled our thinking down here. So when we try and discuss with people, particularly for the first time, whether they're at level 2 or 3, they might say, well, we've got cross-functional teams, but we're still on writing scripts, so we haven't done any automated builds. So it's a good one for driving discussion, but what we do in the DTF is we break this down in a lot more detail so that you can really kind of pull out which bits are relevant to you across these kind of areas that we looked at a minute ago. So I'm not going to bore you with all of the matrices today, but just to give you, actually just before we move on to them, let's just have a quick look at this. So this is the Gartner Continuous Delivery Maturity Scale. I'm in 2 minds about this. I've seen customers use it. I think it can be helpful. I think it misses some important points. So for example, if we're looking at release management and compliance, I think it's a bit high level. I think saying quantitatively managed, that you're kind of monitoring and proactively managing, I just think it's a bit too basic, and I think it needs a bit more detail. So what we're trying to do here is go into a bit more detail than that particular maturity scale. So really kind of identifying, this is the requirements management maturity scale. So really kind of identifying what an organisation is actually doing and what the environment looks like for requirements management to substantiate its position on this maturity scale. So you'll get a copy of the slides after this session. As Ted said earlier, it's being recorded, so I won't go through all of that with you. We'll just move on to another one, which is the release and deployment management maturity scale that we're using. So again, if you remember what the Gartner was saying a minute ago, I felt it was a bit vague. It was sort of talking about optimizing and monitoring. I think we can be more specific about what we're actually doing. You know, push button deployments. We've got fully secured role-based activity, role-based access. We can do deployment on demand. There's various different things that are definable there. So once we've gone through those various different areas and identified the level on the maturity scale where you are now and how capable you are in each of those specific areas, we can then start identifying the bottlenecks. And then once we've done identified the bottlenecks, we can start doing the metrics. So as I said, metrics. Now, this is where we start thinking about more of the business metrics. So you'll remember in part 1 in cultural change, we'd specified some high-level business goals. We're going to collect these type of metrics. So these, if you'll see, these are kind of linked to the metrics that we looked at earlier in terms of sort of requirements management and testing and deployment and release automation and application performance monitoring. So these are kind of all the things that we're trying to measure there. So defects, volume of releases, MTTR, all that kind of stuff. But we're also going to introduce some business metrics here. So I kind of, gave you a few examples earlier about volume of credit card applications or mortgage applications or number of transactions to Swift. So the kind of things that we can say are happening. Now, the metrics are really important because they form the basis of our business case. And at this point, we can start writing business cases because we can start saying, right, we know that process is taking us this long. We think if we improve the handoffs or the interactions in these areas, we can reduce that process time. We will write more business cases in part 3 when we get to automation, because the business case there will say something along the lines of, we now have a process that takes, say, a week to do a release and deployment of an application. But we know that if we automate it further and we can introduce reduced handoffs and templates and things like that, that we can reduce that process a further 90%, say, to 2 hours, and therefore that gives us a productivity improvement of Y, and then it perhaps also gives us, if we know that that application, for example, is a revenue or margin generating application, we know that taking that application to the market that much earlier will give us a key advantage that we can measure, again, to be worth X amount. So I've kind of just alluded to this, the third and final part of the DTF, which is all around automation. So here we have a look at your DevOps toolchain. So this is an example of a very loosely coupled DevOps toolchain, but you can see the various different components of things that we expect to be in there. Once we've understood the bottlenecks and we've addressed them from a process point of view or an interactions point of view, we can start thinking about tooling. So the tasks that we take you through here are analysing your existing toolchain. So we'll get some ticks in boxes and some names, whether you're using Jenkins and Jira and Git and Puppet or Chef or Urban Code or Lisa or Green Hat or whatever it is. We can start documenting all of these pieces and then start looking at, right, based on the high level business goals that you've stated, based on where we've identified process problems and bottlenecks, based on the business case that we've written on improving that process, and you may want to complete that piece before you look at automation. These are the automation tools that we recommend, or you identify yourselves as you work through the DTF, to be used to further accelerate your process. So just a couple of other notes on when we start looking at automation, and DevOps as a whole, although I think it becomes more pertinent when we get to the automation piece, is kind of where to start and which application to pick. So this slide here, the pace layers, is from a Ronnie Colville report called The 7 Steps to DevOps. And I think it's her second step. She says pick an app. And what we're talking about here is which app to pick. We have this concept of the systems of innovation, so the kind of very webby systems, the ones that you're changing a lot to kind of give social media and web-based interactions and experience to your end users, are at the kind of broad triangle, or broad end of the triangle for DevOps. And then we've got our legacy systems, or the systems with record, which are the traditional applications. Now, this is a point of great debate, and I will try with Tej to remember to link you to one of our partners, Ben Wotton's from Contino's blogs from earlier this week, where he talks on this very subject, and actually where he sees getting lots of DevOps value out of picking a more traditional application rather than these very new applications, in terms of getting lots of DevOps benefit. So this is again, a task in this section of the DTF, is to walk you through how to choose an application, how to identify the value of using that application, and how to understand the risks that you're taking by picking particular types of application. And again, I've said this before, we're writing the business cases. So, it's discover, analyze, discover and find the metrics and baseline the metrics, identify where you want to be, plan where you want to be, get the metrics, and write the business case on the back of it. So just coming to the end of today's webcast now. So first of all, before we finish, what you get in the DevOps transformation framework is you get a workbook. So it's quite a few pages long, it's quite big, but it has very clear activities and tasks for you to complete in these 3 sections that I've walked you through today. There's a number of maturity models in there for you to work with, and I've shown you a couple of them today. I've mentioned the survey templates that we have. There are survey templates for, I mentioned the one for the cultural surveys. We also have some survey templates around tooling and around the automation and the interactions piece as well. We have templates that help you define your goals in each piece as well. So we talked about the cultural goals in quite some detail. There's also a need in all of the sections, so in the interaction section, to identify which processes you're trying to improve and by how much, and then in the automation section, which tools you're going to implement and how they're going to improve your processes by how much. And then there's a number of checklists that we have that are quite detailed. As I said, You can cross bits out if they're irrelevant to you. You can add bits in, but at least it gives you a basic framework to get started. There's also the business case templates that I've referred to several times. So business cases that we've built many times before with people around what automating deployment would look like in terms of how you calculate resource and time savings and productivity increases. And then there's also a project template and the project reporting template. So we built some stuff in there to enable you to slot in your answers from the previous tasks and then give you a basic way of taking that to your stakeholder team and to your executive sponsor and saying, right, this is what the project looks like. This is where we were at the start. This is where we are a month in, if that's when you choose to do your first review. And then these are the things that we've achieved and succeeded in. So that is the DTF. So that is our way to help you understand what DevOps is actually going to do for you and actually make it happen. And it seems to be one of the big challenges we're experiencing with our customers at the moment. So I'm going to ask Tej now if we have any questions on the call today. I can't see any in the chat section. Oh, are you on mute? Hello.
Yep, I muted myself and was talking. So we have one question, which is, what's the best way to start a conversation about interactions and processing?
So that is a great question. I think probably get everyone in a room. Now, the way that we do it in the DMA, our DevOps Maturity Assessment, which I alluded to or spoke about very quickly earlier on, is we interview individuals through the process on a one-to-one basis. So our consultants sit with them and we actually talk through those maturity models that I've shown you. So we'll open up a conversation about requirements management and, what do you use? How does that work for you? How quick is the process? Where do you see any problems happening? So we do that in the DMA as a one-to-one interview process. In the DTF, it's defined as more of a group activity for the project stakeholders. But there's no reason why you shouldn't do it as interviews as well. But I think using those maturity models is the key part of getting started with that conversation.
Okay. If you have any other questions, you can enter them now into the chat feature. And we have one more question, which is, do you think there is a case where you could build a DevOps team separately?
Yeah, so hopefully that came across. I'm not sure it should ever be a permanent thing. But hopefully that came across in when I was talking about Johnny at Marks and Spencer's and we talked about the slide with DevOps as a service and this kind of concept of having a DevOps tiger team. So people that are probably quite loosely coupled in their own team, but free to kind of roam around and be used as resources, as part-time resources on other projects to keep them running and keep them boosting and making sure that DevOps vision and the DevOps goals are being adhered to. And yeah, I think the other time is as a stepping stone. So create that DevOps team to begin with, and then kind of merge it out as you merge that Venn diagram and share and collaborate.
Okay, that's all for the questions. So thanks, Helen, for that great presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you for attending today's webcast. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.